Hello and welcome back, everyone, to these lectures on mindfulness and heartfulness practices. We are honored and delighted to have Dr. Ricahard Davidson, Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry, and the founder and the head of the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Hi, Richie.
Hi, wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making time for us. Just a few notes of housekeeping before we move on to your presentation. To our participants, you will be put on mute, but you have the privilege of asking Dr. Davidson directly your questions using that question box on your screen. And then we will be recording these sessions in case you miss it. For any reason, they'll be live on our Facebook and website at a later time. And with that, we move on to the lecture of the night, which is about well-being in a skill. And to give you my impression of the title, even the title just gave me a sense of responsibility of the past few weeks that I've been brooding over. Sense of responsibility of what goes on in my mind. John Kabat-Zinn in his lecture webinar, he was talking about the foundation of mindfulness, which is observing. And then we had Chris Germer and Saki Santorelli advising that we should do it with a touch of kindness and heart. And when I was reviewing your book and your lectures, it came to me that I should be aware of letting it go when I hold it with kindness. It's time to let it go. Otherwise, whatever we are carrying is affecting the brain and the mind. So I personally have become much more responsible about what's going on up here since I've reviewed the beautiful work at your lab. So please tell us more about your beautiful findings at the lab.
Thank you so much, Amir. Let me begin by simply giving a little background. I am a neuroscientist and a psychologist by training, and I've been interested in a central question for my entire career. Early on, the way that question was formulated is, why is it that certain people are more vulnerable to life's challenges and other people more resilient? And then how can we nudge people along this continuum to flourish, to become more resilient? And that question is one that we continue to address in different ways as new research opportunities emerge and as new measures become available, and so on. In the early part of my career, I focused a lot on how we respond to adversity. And then in 1992, I met the Dalai Lama for the first time, and he challenged me and said, "You've been using these tools of modern neuroscience to study stress and adversity and anxiety and fear. Why can't you use those same tools to study kindness and compassion?" And that was very much a wake-up call for me. And I began to shift the work that we were doing toward more virtuous qualities of the mind. And that leads us really all the way to the present. But there were a number of major developments in modern science that helped to facilitate this work. It was not simply work that we were doing ourselves, but rather we were building on the shoulders of many others who provided the foundation for allowing this work to go forward. And I'd like to briefly say a little bit about what some of those key developments were that enabled this work to go forward. One is neuroplasticity. And many viewers have probably heard that word. Neuroplasticity simply refers to the notion that our brains are shaped by experience. Our brains are constantly being shaped. And as I often say, they're being shaped wittingly or unwittingly, which means that there are times when our brain is being shaped by forces around us about which we may only be dimly aware or perhaps completely unaware. And many of those forces we have very little control over. And so our brains are constantly being changed by the events around us, by the experiences that we have. And the invitation in all of this work is that, and it really goes back to your comment at the beginning, Amir, we can take more responsibility for our own brains. And by cultivating virtuous qualities of mind, by training our mind in this way, it turns out that we can change our brains. And we can change our brains in ways that promote the more enduring changes that support human flourishing. And so neuroplasticity is really an important theme. A second theme related to neuroplasticity in the realm of genomics is epigenetics. And epigenetics is the science of how genes are regulated. Every human being is born with a sequence of base pairs which constitute our DNA. And for the most part, except in some rare circumstances, but for the most part, for every person, the sequence itself will not change as they go through life. But what will change is the extent to which any given gene is turned on or turned off. You can think of genes having little volume controls, molecular volume controls. And those volume controls determine the extent to which the gene is manufacturing the protein for which it is designed. And what we find in hard-nosed research is that our experiences can actually influence our gene expression. It can influence the extent to which a gene is turned on or turned off. Let me give one example. If a mother behaves in a very loving, nurturant way toward her offspring, that will induce epigenetic changes in the offspring that promote positive characteristics. Those epigenetic changes turn out to last quite a long time, and in certain cases actually persist for the entire duration of life. And so this is a case where early experience can have a very profound effect on the expression of our genes. Several years ago, we published a paper showing for the first time that in long-term meditators who are meditating intensively for a one-day period, we can actually see changes in gene expression over the course of just this one day. This is in an 8-hour period. So this is the first time anyone has demonstrated that our gene expression is highly dynamic and can be influenced by pure mental training. And so this is, in many ways, a parallel to neuroplasticity, and it suggests that for both our brain and our genes, there is much more dynamic change than any of us previously thought. And how our minds operate and the extent to which we train our minds will influence both the wiring and function of our brain, as well as the expression of our genes. So the third theme that I'd like to very briefly mention, this will be the last one that I'll mention now, is a theme that we call innate basic goodness. Innate basic goodness. And what we mean by this is that every human being is actually born into the world with a propensity to prefer warm-hearted, cooperative, altruistic interactions compared to those that are selfish, greedy, aggressive. This is quite remarkable. It's not to say that the bad stuff isn't there, but it's simply to say that if a organism is given a choice, the individual will choose a warm-hearted, pro-social alternative compared to one that is selfish and aggressive. And that has been demonstrated empirically in research with very young babies, human babies, who are exposed to puppets, for example. And in one scenario, the puppets are behaving really badly toward one another. They're sort of beating each other up, and one is selfish. And in another case, they're very warm-hearted and cooperative. And then if these puppets are offered to the kids, to the babies, to see which puppet the baby reaches for, the baby will reach for the warm-hearted puppet, not the puppet that was mean. And so this has now been demonstrated repeatedly, and it indicates that when we come into the world, we come into the world with this innate propensity to prefer these warm-hearted interactions. And so when we do simple meditation practices that are designed to cultivate loving kindness and compassion, we're not doing a practice that is creating these qualities out of thin air, de novo, as we would say, but rather we are becoming more familiar with a basic characteristic of our own mind. We are becoming more familiar with innate basic goodness. And when we recognize that every human being shares this, it can really influence in a very powerful way how we treat others. And it can, I think, help to decrease the kind of interpersonal conflicts which are so pervasive in our world today and underlie so many of the really major problems that our civilization is facing. And so we have, on the basis of all this, we have formulated a framework for understanding well-being that consists of a number of different constituents, and each of these constituents is supported by different brain circuits. These brain circuits all show plasticity. That is, we know that they can be changed by experience and changed by training. And one of the major efforts that our center is involved with now is an effort to disseminate these kinds of trainings widely so that we can influence the well-being of many different sectors of the culture. And one of the ways that we're doing this is with taking advantage of digital technology, where we can put some of this on a smartphone, put it online, and help people with simple guided practices in the workplace. We can work with educators in this way to train these different constituents of well-being in ways that we think can make a difference in major sectors of our culture. So that is a large initiative in which we're involved now. We envision creating versions for the workplace, for educators, for healthcare providers, for parents of new parents who are just having their first child, and in this way begin to influence these major groups and produce change sort of one sector at a time as we can bring this to that sector. So those are some of the questions that we're interested in and some of the research that we've been doing. And perhaps I will stop at this point, and I'm very happy to address questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Richie. Yes. A few decades of work in 15 minutes. I was reading or listening to your book, Altered Traits, with Dan Goldman. And it's amazing how much work has been done past 40 or so years.
Yes.
And, you know, it's all good news. When I was reading the book, it was just all good news that, you know, the innate goodness of us and the fact that we become what we think. You know, these are all good stuff coming out of your research. Thank you. We've had some questions before the session, so I'm starting with some of them
Okay.
while I receive the ones that are coming in now. One person, Sahar, is asking, meditation is sometimes used for dissociation or repression. What is the difference between a correct meditation practice and the one that is only escape? Is there any neurophysiological marker that distinguishes these two from each other?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and good question. I would say that a person might use a meditation practice for the purposes of repression or to sort of bury a psychological disturbance. But I think if they're using it in that way, at least in most cases, they would not be using it in the way that would be considered correct or appropriate. They're sort of misusing it, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to have authentic instructors who can teach this, who I think would avoid a mistake of that kind. Whether there are neurophysiological markers of it or not has not been systematically studied, although what I would say is, based on understanding the brain and the research that has been done, I believe you would be able to differentiate between meditation used for the purpose of repression versus used for in a more appropriate kind of way. There are markers that can be looked for, which I believe would reveal differences.
So that's research for future, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yes. Good. Fariba is asking, I've had a challenging life and my mind is used to the negative side all the time. Now I really want to be happy again. And it is very difficult. Is there anything that you can help me with?
I would suggest to this person that in the morning and the evening of every day that you take just a few minutes and reflect on those things that are positive in your life. And even a life that is challenged, everyone has some positive things occurring. The very fact of being born as a human being and having the mind that we are gifted with as a human being is a wonderful positive attribute to begin with. And reflecting on that capacity, being able to breathe on one's own is something that is really beautiful and miraculous in many ways, and simply rejoicing in these little things and appreciating them. When even people who've lived a difficult life, when you reflect deeply on your daily experience, most people have positive things that happen to them even in the middle of tragedy. Acts of kindness that others express toward you and so forth. And simply noting these in your mind, you can even write them down to help remember them after you do a little period of contemplation. This can be very, very helpful in orienting the mind back toward the positive.
Yes. Yes, I should tell you, Richie, that your book and your research has made me very sensitive to this, that the finding the little things in the middle of whatever, if it's called a catastrophe. So it's about, I think it's about the willpower we put into finding it is, and it's there, like, you know, you're saying the air or the kindness.
Well, and this is one of the reasons why we recommend formal practice. It's not so much the experiences that occur during the formal practice, but rather it conditions the mind so that when we face adversity, we'll remember to look at these positive things. It's a way to strengthen that muscle, if you will.
Of remembering.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Would you please explain the neurophysiology of samadhi, or what is called absorption in deep meditation? I don't know how.
Yeah, so samadhi or concentration, excuse me, or absorption, these are all terms that refer to a particular style of meditation practice that involves focused attention. Excuse me. And focused attention can be helpful in stabilizing the mind and in producing equanimity and calmness. And there are certain neural markers that are associated with this kind of mental stability that involve networks in the brain that are important for attention, particularly connections between the prefrontal cortex and other areas of the brain involved in emotion and attention. And so in many different contemplative traditions, there are practices designed to cultivate concentration or absorption, really not as an end in itself, but as a means, as a way to stabilize the mind so that when you do other practices, the attention is stable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Can we move on to the next question?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's a question asking, what happens to our brain as a result of too much digital utilization, cyberspace? Is there a scientific fact behind all the warnings we hear in the media of overusing,
Yeah, another important question. There is some good science that is related to this that does suggest that the increased exposure to our personal digital devices has taken a toll on our capacity to attend. Mm-hmm. And today, in today's world, there is good experimental evidence to show that people are on average more distracted than they were 50 years ago prior to the introduction of personal digital devices. So there's very good research using the same identical measures that were obtained 50 years ago on a representative sample. And today, assuming that one of the major differences between 50 years ago and today is the change in the availability of personal digital products. So I would say that there are good scientific data showing some of the deleterious effects. And I think it's obvious to all the viewers that these products are here to stay. We're not going to get rid of them. And so I think that, and they confer some obvious benefits, but we can learn to change our relationship to these products. We can learn to use them in a more skillful way And rather than checking our email or our messaging, 70 times a day, we can do it on a much less frequent basis, and manage to live our lives just fine. And so, again, this is something that takes practice, and there is a kind of addiction that is associated with it. But just as with other forms of addiction, if we become more aware of our craving for information in this case, we can learn to better regulate it.
Yes. Perhaps one of the apps that you are working in your lab would be to divert that pulse to check the iPhone or the messages to somewhere else. Using it because we are doing it anyway, checking the iPhone.
Yes.
But while doing it, maybe going somewhere else.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
practicing attention rather than. So
yes.
Thank you. And my experience is the iPhones and the digital, the overusing it is really bringing down, and this is my personal experience, is weakening the ability to relax and just be. You see, even that being has become involved with too much of checking messages. So we can't do that even, just not doing anything. That I think is becoming an endangered skill.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, no, I think we talked about that. Why after long, I think I like this one. It relates to me too. Why after long-term retreats, meditation retreats, we fall back into our default mode? Give and take, a bit of sustainable difference. Does watching the brain explain this? I think she's referring to the fact that.
What was the second part of the question? So long-term retreat, we fall back into our default mode?
Yeah, when we go back to the default mode, she says with a bit of a sustainable difference that we change. I think she's saying that we change a bit, but the default mode is still there, that we come out of that,
Well, I think that basically it requires quite a lot to change the brain in major ways that are enduring. It's like changing the course of a river that's been flowing in the same direction for 30, 40, 50 years. We can't expect, or think of a physical exercise analogy. If someone is grossly overweight and has not taken care of him or herself and goes to the gym, there's only so much change that you can expect in a short period of time. This kind of change is gradual, and it takes work. It takes constant work. And so it's very important, I think, for people who begin this journey to set realistic expectations. And realistic expectations mean being very modest in those expectations, and not expecting major change to happen overnight, and just to take it one small step at a time. And I think if people did that, they would notice change, but it may be on the order of decades, yes, rather than rather than days or weeks.
Yes. That raises my question. Where does that go? Like, you see, if you go to a Vipassana 10-day silence, you come out walking on clouds. And you're very sensitive to everything that is going on in your body and around you. Now, if we look at the brain, something has happened in that brain that is hyper vigilant to whatever that is arising in and outside. Now, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that subsides. Now, if you look at the brain, does it like something lightens up and then goes down? You see, do we know this?
Well, we don't know it definitively, but we certainly have some good ideas. And there are changes which occur that are transient, where you can see a change pre to post retreat, and then those changes begin to dissipate. And it's not that unusual. And you know, it's also, there's a lot of variation in different meditation traditions in terms of how retreats are done, and it's really to address this issue of reintegration. If we pretty quickly come back to our default mode and to baseline after a week or two, you know, that's something to reflect on. And it may be that if we can better figure out how to integrate practice with everyday life, we can have changes that occur that are perhaps more enduring. But I think one thing that's really important to say about all of this is that one size will not fit all. And I often say to people in public settings that I will tell you what the very best form of meditation is to do. And that the very best form of meditation to do is the form of meditation that you actually do.
Yes, that you find.
Yes, that you do consistently.
Yes. Oh,
consistently. And that's going to be different for different people. Yes. So there's no magic prescription here, but there is good evidence to suggest that regularity of practice is really important.
Of course, yes. And I love that piece of finding that you were mentioning in your book, The Altered Trait. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the fastest way of changing the brain or having lasting effect is the act of generosity and helping. Yes. That I found to be very important.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's, I'm happy you're raising this. And this is, we think, related to this idea that I mentioned just a little while ago of innate basic goodness. I think that it is possible to produce changes more quickly when you're doing a loving kindness or compassion practice, because the nature of our minds is already imbued with this innate basic goodness, and we are really reminding ourselves of a quality that is there from the outset.
Yes, yes. Going back to the linguistic root of mindfulness, which is remembering, I think I've heard.
Exactly. Exactly.
Remembering what is there. Oh, this is a long question. Let me see if we have time for it. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yes, a few more.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, if we end in 8 minutes, it'll be great.
8 minutes? Yes. Yeah, I think we can. Yeah. It says, I practice heartfulness meditation with yogic transmission where life force or pranahuti is transmitted from the teacher's heart to the practitioner to expedite and facilitate the meditation effect, the sitting. It does help, and experientially, I feel much more absorbed and fast, and much faster absorbed, like a boost of love, this transmission, heartfulness. Now, would this make sense to your scientific brain and observation? Or is it possible that one can put you in a deeper state of brainwave? That might be the case here in pranahuti.
It's an interesting and complicated question, and certainly there are ways of approaching this question from a mainstream scientific perspective. We know that a lot of learning that occurs in life is what we call implicit social learning. That is, we can implicitly pick up on cues that are conveyed by others, and we can be deeply impacted by them without invoking any kind of special supernatural kind of energy or power. I have had the honor and privilege of spending quite a bit of time around His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I have that kind of experience with him all the time. And there are conventional ways of understanding that in terms of his demeanor and the implicit social learning that occurs in response to that kind of demeanor. So I think it's entirely possible that this kind of thing occurs. I think there are conventional, quote, conventional explanations for it. Whether there's anything more than that, I don't know. I certainly do not believe that our accounts of understanding reality in science are very complete at this point in time. I think there's a lot that we don't know. So who knows? But certainly, I think the phenomenon is real. It's important. And we do know that there are conventional ways of understanding it, at least initially. And I think more research needs to be done to determine whether there's something more than can be explained by these conventional explanations.
Yes. Another research question of the night.
Yes.
Thank you. One last question. Sorry, it says, thank you so much for your lovely presentation. Could you suggest some readings on the subject of innate basic goodness as an area of research? I think it's a researcher that is asking the question.
Yes, I certainly can. One of the major contributors to research in that area is someone by the name of Tomasello, who is at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany. And he has done a lot of work in this area. And a number of his students have gone on to continue that work. And if you search for Tomasello, you'll certainly find work related to this.
Wonderful. I think we are almost getting to the end of your time. We would love to have you much longer than this, Richie, but we know you're a busy man, and thank you so much for making this time.
I'm happy to have made it, and I appreciate the audience's interest in these topics, and I encourage all of you to continue on this journey and to help make the world a better place. Yes. By changing it one mind at a time.
Yes, no, it is my personal experience past few weeks that I've been involved with your work, that it does make the world is a kinder, softer place when we are responsible about what's going on in our mind. It does bring some softness to their surrounding. Mm. And my last wish while reviewing your work is maybe I want to volunteer to be at your lab and serve tea to your clients.
I would love to have you. Thank you so much for the offer.
There are so many remarkable minds going through your labs with thousands of hours of meditation. Thank you so much for all this heartfelt work. An honor to you,
Amir, and thank you for all you're doing to help promote these ideas through important parts of the world.
Thank you. Maybe one day we will have you in Iran, Richie.
I would love to visit at some point.
Yes, Yes, that's a very beautiful dream. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.